Um, uh, if you have any questions as we go through the program tonight, please just type them in the chat and we will take your questions in about an hour, where we're going to have Q&A after all of our panelists speak. The program is being recorded, so this will be on our website for anyone who couldn't join us tonight and really wanted to hear it. So it is being recorded. And we will also have a list of all the organizations that you can get involved in. Would you be interested? That we will also have on our website, but will allow you to see all of them at the end of our session today. And then just a request, as you always get with Zoom, to keep your mic off so that we don't get any reverberation. Okay, so let's just dig in so we can listen to all these fabulous panelists that we've got for you tonight. As we all know, on February 24th, 2022, Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale military assault on Ukraine, including attacks on civilians. And many Ukrainians have fled. Many others are staying and fighting to defend their communities. So tonight, we're going to learn more about the Russian aggression and find out what we can do to help. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists. I'm in order of their appearance tonight. I'm going to introduce them first, and then I will be interviewing each one of them with a set of questions that we've designed together. Okay, so let me start first with Kelly. Kelly Gauger is the Deputy Director in the Office of Refugee Admissions at the U.S. Department of State, the Bureau of Population, Refugees and Migration. We refer to it as PRM, of course, in Washington. Her work includes developing PRM's $400+ million budget for the refugee admissions program. And she's also in charge of worldwide overseas refugee processing. And her specialty is Ukraine, which is why we're so lucky to have her. She's extremely busy and we really appreciate her coming on. Andriy Tishibishov was formerly the HIV/AIDS program manager for Peace Corps Ukraine from 2005 to 2015. And Andrei has been in the US since 2015. He got his master's in public health and then has been very instrumental in setting up humanitarian aid programs for Ukraine families in the first days following the Russia's full-scale invasion. He's also helped former Peace Corps Ukraine colleagues escape the violence and relocate in the US and other places around the world. Michael Ketover served as Peace Corps Country Director in Kyiv, Ukraine from 2018 to 2022, so just recently back. Before this, Michael, who is a poverty law and human rights lawyer, did a lot of volunteering. So he served as a Peace Corps volunteer in both Honduras and Guyana. He was part of Peace Corps' Crisis Corps in the Dominican Republic and was a VISTA volunteer in Southern Arizona. Michael is who you saw on the video as we opened up tonight. He has a band called Love Over Anger Music that plays 70s rock and roll music. They're awesome. I've heard them on YouTube. And he's raised a substantial amount of money for Ukraine through his musical performances. Reza Alstott is the National Peace Corps Association, we call it MPCA, liaison for Returned Peace Corps Volunteers Alliance for Ukraine, which we're going to learn a ton about tonight because they have been extraordinary. And we're going to focus a lot on their work in a video that we'll see later. Reza taught English with Peace Corps in Ukraine from 2019 to 2020 when she was evacuated for COVID, like Peace Corps evacuated worldwide, everybody. And Reza was part of that evacuation. And she has been very involved in the Alliance for Ukraine and their very dedicated work. And then lastly, I want to introduce our invaluable Shireen Tafriq. Shireen has served as a youth development volunteer in Peace Corps Guatemala from 2011 to 13. And she is currently co-chair of Women of Peace Corps Legacies Outreach and Events Committee. And we couldn't have done this without her expertise and hard work. So big shout out to you and to all of our panelists, because we have some wonderful panelists who are very busy people, and we're really lucky that they've agreed to join us tonight. All right, Kelly, I'm going to start with you. And I think I have my numbers right, but I think that somewhere around 6 million Ukrainians have fled Ukraine to find refuge in numerous countries around the world. And 7 million are displaced in Ukraine itself. So we'd like to hear from you about what the US is doing to help the Ukrainians who chose to come to the United States. So it's my understanding that the Ukrainians resettling here have a unique or special immigration status. And if you could tell us a little bit about that and how we in the United States are assisting them.
Sure. Thank you, Corey. So let me just back up a little bit to talk about the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program that the State Department, my office, helps to coordinate. You all may have seen, because it's been very public, that President Biden about a year ago, pledged that the United States would admit up to 125,000 refugees this fiscal year. He also, about 6 months ago, said that the United States would welcome up to 100,000 Ukrainians to the United States. So there's a little bit of, there's two different pathways into the United States for Ukrainians who want to come right now. So the program that my office runs is called the Lautenberg Program for Ukrainian and other former Soviet Union refugees. It's a program that we have run going back to 1990. It's a program that has, in the beginning, focused on Soviet, mostly Russian Jews, that over the years has transitioned to support mostly Ukrainian evangelical Christians or other Christians, Orthodox Christians with family ties in the United States. It's a program that we've run out of Kyiv for the last 6 years or so, after we moved our base of operations from Moscow into Kyiv because it became difficult to operate in Moscow anymore. And it's a program that, in the recent past has admitted between, let's say, 3,000 and 5,000 Ukrainians to the United States every year. Well, when the events in February happened, when Russia invaded Ukraine, our office in Kyiv had to shut down, and we moved our base of operations to Chisinau, Moldova, and now again to Warsaw, Poland. And what we're doing is we're taking individuals who have applied to our program, who normally were being processed in country, who have now fled into parts of Eastern and Central Europe, and we're processing their cases. So the challenge is that in a lot of situations, the women and children of these cases have departed Ukraine, but the men are still behind because there are restrictions on males of a certain age leaving Ukraine. So we have, a lot of individuals of some portion of our cases who are in places like Poland, Moldova, Czech Republic, Hungary, Germany. And we're working with them and the cases that want to travel on to the United States. These cases are interviewed by a refugee officer of the Department of Homeland Security, and determined to be refugees under US law and brought to the United States. That number has actually been relatively low this year. We've only admitted, we're almost at the end of fiscal year 22, and we've admitted about 1,400 Ukrainian refugees via this program. So lower than the number we have admitted in recent years, largely because of this family separation issue. At the same time, the Department of Homeland Security has announced I think it was in March or April, the Uniting for Ukraine program, otherwise known as U4U, which allows Ukrainians with sponsors in the United States to apply for humanitarian parole in the United States, which is a temporary status that Ukrainians can get to come to the United States for 2 years. It allows them to apply for work authorization. It allows them access to certain benefits provided by the Department of Health and Human Services, and it allows children to go to school. As of last Friday, there have been 128,000 U4U supporter applications filed, meaning in the United States, 128,000 Americans. I think most of them are of Ukrainian descent, but not all. They've filed to support Ukrainians. 90,000 Ukrainian beneficiaries have been approved for travel to the United States, and about 55,000 Ukrainians have actually traveled and been paroled into the United States. So that is obviously a much larger number, but this population is not a population that is on a path for permanent resettlement in the United States unless they apply for asylum with the Department of Homeland Security. So we've got this large number of Ukrainians who are here temporarily on this parole program, a much smaller number who are coming for permanent resettlement via the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program.
Wow, Kelly, that's awesome that those numbers have increased exponentially. That's wonderful to hear. And many of them are coming to live with Ukrainian families or people of Ukrainian background. So those families and their sponsors, if you will be helping to take care of them.
Yes.
Helping them get into school, get the status that you just talked about, help set them up and all of that. So are the traditional resettlement agencies that we know we're working with others like the Afghans, are the resettlement agencies involved in helping the Ukrainians get settled into the United States?
They are. So we have 9 resettlement agency partners for the State Department. And so, many of you will know these organizations. A lot of them are faith-based, like the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Church World Service. Some of them are secular, like the International Rescue Committee, the Ethiopian Community Development Council. They are absolutely involved in all of the refugees that we brought in. So the smaller numbers I was talking about all get assigned to a refugee resettlement agency that's under cooperative agreement with us at the State Department. And they, greet them at the airport and help with initial services. On the larger number of Ukrainian parolees, people who have been granted parole through Uniting for Ukraine, it's their choice whether they want to be hooked up with a resettlement agency. These individuals are not eligible for State Department funded services, but they're eligible for HHS funded services. So what I'm guessing a lot of these Ukrainians are doing is they're being connected and they're reuniting with family members in the United States. Again, not all of them are family members, but a lot of them are. And I think that when they get here, probably some of them are evaluating, do I need federal aid? Do I need cash and medical assistance? Or am I going to be here for a short enough period of time? Do I think that my family is well enough off that they can support me? We have not seen 100% of Ukrainians granted parole through U4U accessing federal benefits, but they're there for them. So our resettlement agencies, the 9 agencies I spoke about earlier, they are involved in helping to administer HHS benefits. So yes, our resettlement agencies are very much involved. And we have about, I think these days we've got about 280 local resettlement offices across the country. So these are organizations like Catholic Charities of Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Lutheran Social Services of Fargo, North Dakota. And they're the ones who are actually helping Ukrainians access these benefits.
Kelly, do you have any sense of how many of the Ukrainians coming in these numbers would maybe hope to go back to Ukraine once the war is over?
I mean, the assumption, Corey, that Ukrainians who are coming through Uniting for Ukraine will return to Ukraine. That this is a temporary. I mean, you're eligible to stay here for up to 2 years, but that for the most part, it is a temporary arrangement that will allow people to come here, kind of get out of harm's way, and then eventually return to Ukraine. I mean, the interesting thing is I was in Warsaw earlier this, I guess it was in May, meeting with the Polish government, meeting with organizations that are working with Ukrainian refugees. And they really found the vast majority of Ukrainian refugees not want to leave Ukraine for good. They want to go home. And in fact, a lot of Ukrainian refugees don't even want to go into Western Europe. They want to stay in Eastern and Central Europe, very close to Ukraine, so that they can go home. And a lot of them are going home, women and children may be going back and visiting their husbands who had to stay behind, their sons, their fathers. And so The assumption is that most of these people do not want to permanently resettle in the United States. And again, if they're here on U4U under parole, in order to stay permanently, they would have to file for asylum with the Department of Homeland Security, meaning they then have to show in an interview they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of the 5 protected grounds, and can stay. But you know, I think the big question is, how long is this conflict going to continue? And there may be a difference between people who have come here from Eastern Ukraine, where the conflict is still very live, and Western Ukraine, you know, where the Russians have largely withdrawn and perhaps people feel safe going back. So I think there's no one answer for everybody.
Yeah, Kelly, and the line for asylum is huge.
Huge.
It's
Very
huge.
long.
And so I know, I mean, I'm aware of that because I was working with refugees for many years. And so a lot of the Ukrainians, as you just mentioned, are in a variety of countries. Are we, how are we helping? How's the United States? Are we? And how are we to in some of these other places where the Ukrainians are?
We are. Of course, most of these Ukrainians are in countries in Europe that are fully capable of absorbing them. I mean, one of the things that was interesting when I went to Warsaw in May, one of the main things I was looking at is how can the United States help some of these host countries absorb some of these refugees? Can we look to kind of figure out how we can take some of these refugees? And frankly, what I found was most of these countries, both the frontline states, so you know the Hungary, Poland, Moldova, Czech Republic, Romania, they're doing it, handling it very well on their own. And in fact, in some of these countries, they're hoping that some of these Ukrainians will stay because they need labor, they need people. And they want, that's what I heard in Poland, for example. And then of course, in Western Europe, they don't necessarily need our help. Western Europe has, you know, robust economies, robust asylum systems. So we're doing our part by giving contributions to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, to help, especially in the frontline states and maybe the less well-off frontline states like Moldova and Romania, to help with reception and that sort of thing. But yeah, the European countries are largely handling this on their own.
Kelly, I'm going to move on. But again, if we have questions for Kelly, put it in the chat. We'll have time at the end to go through your questions. But Kelly, I guess just thank you for how hard you guys are working. And for those of us who are listening, I'm quite certain that the resettlement agencies in your city could use a hand in helping newcomers who don't have the family connections. And that's a great way to get involved, to welcome people who need that extra hug and care.
Right.
All right, Kelly, thank you so much. Appreciate it a lot.
Thank you, Corey. I'll go off camera, but I'll be here for questions at the end.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Andre, now we're looking forward to hearing from you. You are from Ukraine, as I mentioned, worked with Peace Corps, and you have watched and experienced the trauma of this war firsthand. And so my first question to you is, how has this war with Russia in Ukraine impacted you, your friends, and your loved ones?
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Yes, this horrible war impacted all of us on so many levels. And I do not consider that it impacted me firsthand because I was not under the shelling, or hearing the missiles over my head in Ukraine at that time. But I certainly have felt the pain of the people as they were escaping, the pain of the folks who were sitting in Kiev metro as their locations were bombarded, and so on and so forth. But let me tell you a little bit about myself. I come from Odessa, which has traditionally been Russian-speaking city with very strong international flavor. It's considered the capital of humor in Ukraine, and not only in Ukraine, but in post-Soviet countries. All post-Soviet states call it Odessa Mama. So it's considered very dear to the hearts, and including of those who are in Russia. In 2014, Odessa's rebuke to Putin's invasion of Crimea was a slogan, Vova, which is Vladimir for short, Vova, go home. So get out of Ukraine, get out of Crimea. This was the total destruction of the myth that is popular in Russia, that the Russians are protecting the interests of Russian speakers. They are sick in their mind to equate Russian speakers with Russians or the followers of the Russian world. And so I find it very important to mention that everything, including the pretext of the Russian invasion, both the one in Crimea and also the full-scale invasion, was completely nonsense, and it's just directed at the internal audience of Russians, because nobody outside of Russia consumes that myth. In 2015, I came to Ukraine to the US as a Master of Public Health student at Brown University in Rhode Island. And I'm going to mention this connection later, because this was kind of a very important connection that, and it was very instrumental in my ability to join the response to the Russian invasion and assist the Ukrainians who are both in the country and outside. My first reaction, just like everyone's, was shock that the full-scale invasion was even possible. We were all shocked that it was so brutal and so indiscriminate in who it was targeting, because it was targeting civilian population, civilian infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Second, back then, on February 24th, we were all waiting for the strong reaction of the Russian population to this brutal and unjust war. We were waiting for mothers in Russia to start protesting against having their children sent to this war. There are so many mixed families, Russian and Ukrainian families, living in both countries. We were preparing to hear from all of them. One thing we were not prepared for is just the silence on the other side. And it wasn't just the silence, it was actually kind of a very continuous and sustained support of the war effort on part of the Russians, and I cannot call them the citizens of Russia or the population of Russia. I think that the best term is now the biomass that has been supporting that war. Because all the way until today, pretty much, until September 21st, when Putin announced mobilization in Russia, there was no protest against this war, and everyone was happy on the other hand, and they just preferred to not notice that. So this is something that I personally was never prepared for, because we were all thinking about Russians in terms of, humans, because we are humans. So we thought that compassion and all the human feelings that are applicable to us would be just as applicable to them. We were wrong. As a result of this war, my family has been shattered. My parents had a 27-hour train ride from Odessa to the border with Poland, and that was a ride on an evacuation train. And usually a train ride to Poland would take about 15 to 16 hours. It would be overnight. It was 27 hours in a compartment with 9 people and 3 dogs. It's the same train compartment that is usually allocated to 4 people. There were people sleeping in the hallways. It was just unimaginable. My brother and eventually from Poland, they came to join me in the US. I got them the tickets, and they were able to leave. My brother is currently in Moldova. His family are in Austria as refugees. And this is just one of the examples of a family that is totally finding ourselves all over the place, the map.
That, of course, listening to you brings it all closer to home. Somebody that we know and care about and have an enormous amount of respect for, to hear the difficulty that you're facing and your family's facing, just, it's just hard to hear. I want to ask you about, because I know people were so impressed with you. You were involved in a humanitarian project to organize the delivery of medical supplies and cash assistance, right, to those most in need. Can you share some details on that experience?
Yeah, thank you. That is a very important point. Something we all started with, and for me, the war didn't start on the 24th. It started around 10 p.m. on February 23rd. That was the time in the US when I heard about this. So the only thing I could do was call or Facebook message everyone who was in Kiev at that time, or everyone who was in Odessa, or my friends, my relatives, and just see what's happening, how are you doing? And the first 24 hours were spent just being with people and kind of hearing from them all their stories about, like, we had this shelling just 2 blocks away here. We had to go down to the metro station, and that's where we are now. So people would spend hours and days in the basement, and all I could do was listen to them and try to figure out what we could do. And then eventually some common themes started to appear. And my kids, I would arrange Zoom classes for them so that they wouldn't forget Ukrainian, or actually learn Ukrainian. So there is a school in Ukraine that does Ukrainian teaching online. And so I heard from that school about a day later, and they said, well, we are teachers. We teach Ukrainian, we teach music, arts. Like, these are the things that seemingly immediately become out of the demand as soon as people have other things to take care of, like safety and food for the families. So they immediately found themselves without any income. Then there were other people. I have a friend, a former colleague from my HIV service organization in Kryvyi Rih in central Ukraine, who also we were talking about, and he was describing all the horrors, the closing supermarkets, the closing banks. It was just chaos. They're chaotic at the first days of the war. And we were trying to figure out how to help anyone. But eventually, the banks were the one thing that did work consistently well. So after the very first chaotic day, then the banks reopened. And we all figured out that actually, it's possible to transfer some cash to Ukraine. Big organizations stopped functioning. Even like big international NGOs stopped operations. But it was possible to support individuals. And at that time, I was contacted by Natasha Rybak, who is Brown Ukraine. She is a medical doctor who I got connected through Brown Ukraine collaboration. She's done a lot of research in Ukraine on infectious disease, on tuberculosis. She knows the country very well. She's been there. And so on day one, she posted a fundraiser on Fundly. She didn't know how the money would be spent yet, what was possible to do with this money, but she just posted that fundraiser because she had a network. We all have a network of friends that would need that money eventually. And so we would figure out a way to get that money to them. So she contacted me and her friend Maya and the Heart, and we all started to think, okay, so what can we realistically do? I pulled over I pulled in former RPCVs from Ukraine, Alia Sherman and Laurel Rinaldi-Guizdak, who worked with me in the on the PEPFAR project, because I'm not I don't know how to do war. I don't know how to do many things, but one thing I know is project management and grant making. So that's what we used to do a lot in Ukraine on the PEPFAR project, and we used exactly the same mechanism. So we created, but it was with minimum requirements. So basically, we figured out a system where we identified the need, and initially it was individual families, but then we decided we could not support individual families. We supported groups of people who were most vulnerable, like people with disabilities who were left behind by their families in Kharkiv, or HIV positive people in Kryvyi Rih that I already mentioned, things like that. And we would transfer cash to some representatives of the organizations, of NGOs that were operating not as NGOs, but as individual volunteers at that time. So it started with very small transfers, and by the end of, we started, so by the end of week one, we got the money, the funding, which was about $10,000, I think. By the end of May, we had about $130,000 collected. So by the end of May, we had already transferred about 100 cash grants to individuals. They did not need to report on that, other than just snap a picture of what was purchased and maybe some receipts where it was possible. But it was very stripped down of any reporting. However, we wanted to have some mechanism where we could provide this information back to donors who supported it. And this is the key difference of Ukrainians from Russians in the modern time. Ukrainian civil society just works. You can throw a huge ball at the whole Ukraine and destruct the infrastructure, but you will not destruct the people's ability to organize themselves. And this is exactly what we used, and we supported these self-organized movements. I didn't need to explain anyone why I needed some photos of the project. They already knew that because they had all of this experience of working with donors and building civil society in their communities. So I think it was very successful. And then the other side of that project was procuring medical supplies. For example, we procured several vacuum machines for treating wounds, gunshot wounds, that we sent to Mykolaiv. Mykolaiv is in the south of Ukraine, heavily shelled, with lots of wounded individuals. And the connections, so of course, these machines were nowhere to be found in Ukraine, or even in Poland, or even in Romania. So through some volunteers in Germany, we found the machines in Turkey. They were delivered to Germany. Then they were delivered to Western Ukraine. Eventually, they found themselves in Mykolaiv, where they were supposed to have. So disruptions in the supply chains are very, very real, but eventually civil society figures it out if civil society is strong. And this is where Peace Corps, the 20 years of Peace Corps in Ukraine, actually helps build that civil society in Ukraine.
Andre, I'm going to have to move on. I have a million more questions for you, and hopefully some will come up in the chat. I know that you were very involved in helping your colleagues, your Peace Corps colleagues, evacuate. And so we'll hold off on that question until we go into the chat. All right, Andre, thank you so much. Very interesting hearing a firsthand report of somebody who's still very connected. And Michael, I'm turning it over to you right now. Michael was the last Peace Corps director before the Peace Corps worldwide evacuation due to COVID took place in March of 2020. And the music that we heard when we came on tonight was Michael. That was a picture of Michael playing his music, because he's done quite a bit about raising funds, a substantial amount of money, raising funds through his music. and offering his music up for free, and people putting donations at the event. So Michael, before we get into some of that, tell us just, you're the person we want to ask a bit about the history of Peace Corps and its impact. So how many years was Peace Corps in Ukraine? How many volunteers served? What was the impact in the country? Tell us just a little bit about Peace Corps' history in Ukraine.
Sure. Thank you, Corey, and thank you, National Women Peace Corps Legacy, for inviting me. Andre, also, thank you for everything you've done. Peace Corps, ironically, is celebrating 30 years this year, and we had a super slate of events teed up to celebrate 30 years of fantastic peace and friendship through service. So those are on hold a bit, but hopefully staff will be able to do that. It was the biggest program when I was there. Senegal and Zambia are also quite large, but during the time I was there, and I see Pilar on the line too, and Amy, but we had 460 people cycle through in 2018 and over 400 in 2019. I believe we evacuated 270 or so, or that was the total number in the country. Some were traveling. It was a big group, and my contention is that it was the largest group, not because literacy rates were low, which they're not, or not because of hunger there, which is not an issue. I think it's because of really the Peace Corps' second goal, and to make relationships with so many Americans, with so many Ukrainians, and now with social media, those are forever. And the importance geopolitically of Ukraine and culturally of Ukraine and geographic, just the center of the politics, as people have come to see now. So I inherited a program in a growth mode, and that's kind of where we left it. Just to clarify, my official end date was January 1st, 2022. I left before the new year. I left in December, and Amy was the last person with Peace Corps on the ground, the last American, with Carmen, who we had as a security officer.
Okay, great. So Michael, I know one of the questions that you wanted me to ask you, which I love the fact that you wanted me to ask you this, is what was the best part of your experience in Ukraine? I know you adore this country, you adore Ukrainians, it shows up in everything you do. So why? What is that? What's that about?
The local staff was so talented. I really, I try to manage horizontally wherever I go, but in Ukraine, the local staff and our counterparts and our ministry partners and our sponsoring organizations are just so talented and so committed that that was just energizing for me. And I was able to really work as colleagues with a lot of Ukrainians. That was really, a beautiful thing for me. On the musical side, I met several musicians, so I got to record music and several videos while I was in Ukraine. And I loved Kyiv. I like to run. Amy loves to run. It's a great town, great country to run in. And I'll never forget running in so many different areas in the city, especially during COVID, when everything shut down, and the city, especially at the beginning, was a ghost town. And it was just an intense, the food, there were several foods that I really loved. The craft brewery situation was expanding in the almost 4 years I was there. So, but mostly it was the people and the Ukrainians. So I learned while I was on leave, my mother was going through my old stuff from middle school, and she said, here's an old family tree you put together. And I saw that one of the branches of my grandmother's mom, my great grandma, was from Kamyanets-Podilsky, and it said Kamyanets-Podilsky, Russia. And I had not known the name, none of us had known the name of that city, but that was in Ukraine. So I also learned that I had a great grandmother from Ukraine on my dad's side. And also the woman we call Baba, my mom's grandma, was from the Ivano-Frankivska area that they called Stanislav way back then, but she referred to it as Polish Russia. So again, we didn't know we had the Ukrainian roots, and I think that kind of solidified it for me.
Oh, that's great. Michael, I know that you left in January, but I know that you know a lot about, tell us about how the evacuation went.
Well, the evacuation, the COVID evacuation, that's kind of what I thought you might have been talking about. That was a mess. We don't need to water under the bridge. I don't have a whole lot to say about the evacuation. Amy was the acting director at that point and the acting many things. So she would have a lot more to say. She's on the call. I think we're going to ask her some questions later. But I do know that, the country director is part of the embassy country team, and we meet every week. And, the threat was, I came in after Denny Robertson, who was after Doug Teschner, who left with the volunteers when Russia invaded Crimea. So we were in a growth mode after that evacuation. And, our local staff knew exactly what to do. And it's just brutal on the family side, especially the separation of the families, the kids and the mom generally could go in some places, and the father had to stay. And I know that's the case with many of our staff right now. But Amy would have much more to say than I will.
Michael, I'm going to wrap up with just please tell the group, because I find it super interesting, the events you've been involved in with your music and raising money for Ukraine. Talk to. I've seen a couple of YouTube videos of you, and so talk a little bit about how that's gone.
What I've done is modest. I've tried to make connections. I have a fairly robust presence, social media for better or worse. So I've been able to modestly raise some funds and connect people to trusted folks and organizations in Ukraine. We did have a couple of concerts and we raised some money. Again, not the dollars like Andre is talking about. I was able to connect Emil and Alessio with Courtney and the RPCV Alliance when they were starting to, right after like the first week, raise money for IFACs for first aid kits, and that's just exploded. But what I've done is modest. I'm just trying to raise awareness, try to raise some money, and then just trying to keep people's minds on the important issue that's still going on. It's still horrific.
Great, Michael, thank you so much. And an important effort, because I think we're going to hear in the video, some of the interest is waning a little bit. And so part of why we wanted to do this event is to really bring this back home of how important everything still is on the ground. Michael, thank you so much. Stay on in case there's questions, but and you just gave a shout out to the Alliance for Ukraine. So right now, Reza, please come on. Looking forward to hearing about you. After we ask Reza a couple of questions, we have a video that we want to show that really demonstrates the work of the Alliance, Returned Peace Corps Volunteers Alliance for Ukraine, which has been quite extraordinary. It just shows when you get a group of Returned Peace Corps volunteers together, you can move mountains. And so, Reza, I'm anxious to hear about you. Where did you serve in Ukraine? What are some of your favorite memories of the time? And then I'll ask you some other questions about the work of the Alliance.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. So I served in the center part of the country, about 3 hours south of Kyiv in Cherkasska Oblast. I was in a village about a 20-minute bus ride outside of Cherkasy. And I taught English there at a school. I think my favorite part of living in Ukraine was getting to work with so many students, and like when it clicks with a student and they're really understanding something, just seeing like the look on their face that they're getting it, that they're excited. I think there's nothing better than that, and getting to work with kids and see them grow. I think the other side is being able to really absorb the culture. I had a really good relationship with my counterpart and with my host family. Getting to see how people cook their food and being able to do it now. That's one of the things I love doing in DC where I live now, is I love having friends over and cooking different things for them, like borscht and hulubsi. So that's my two favorite things, is probably just the culture and the food and getting to work with kids.
Okay, Reza, and how did you get involved with the RPCV community for Alliance for Ukraine?
Yeah, so unfortunately I was evacuated. I only got to live in Ukraine for about 9 months. And when people were being sent back to the US, the Alliance for Ukraine was reaching out and kind of running some programs to help like volunteers as they were coming back. And they hosted a town hall where they had Peace Corps Ukraine staff on the call. And there were a lot of us that had been evacuated that were on the call as well, where we just kind of got to speak to each other. And then from there, I just joined the affiliate group. And then they were asking for involvement in different groups. So originally I was on the 30th anniversary event planning committee, and then a position on the board opened up. So I became the NPCA liaison.
Okay, Risa, so there are, how many returned Peace Corps volunteers are officially part of RPCV, Ukraine Alliance? Alliance for Ukraine.
That is a great question. I do not know off the top of my head. We did have a very large increase in membership this year because we are actively doing stuff to help Ukrainians in country. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Courtney, are you on the call? Do you know how many we're at right now?
Hi, do you hear me?
Yeah.
So it depends, because we have people who are active as social media followers and engaged there. We have folks who are signed up officially through the NPCA. And then there are folks who subscribe to our newsletter, and those numbers are all a little bit different. So the folks who are subscribed as members through the NPCA, it's a few hundred, maybe around 300, but our newsletter has readership over 2,000, and our social media reach is probably similar. And it's an interesting point for us because there are a lot of really actively engaged Ukraine RPCVs who are basically de facto members of the Alliance, but may not have their membership set up through the NPCA. I will say that membership is free of charge, and it's a lifetime membership.
Courtney, it is a perfect entree into, I want to show, and I hope this plays okay, you guys. Sometimes when you pick up a video, sometimes the speaking and the sound isn't always right, in sync. But I would like to, at this minute, show the video that Risa, you worked so hard on.
Just mention two things, Corey. Sorry, can I just mention two things before you play the video?
Yeah, yes, I would love that. And I know one of the things that you wanted to talk about, and we'll do that right before we hit it, is just how you have a lot of friends who are deeply emotionally involved in everything that's going on, colleagues, family members that they lived with, people that they loved for 2 years or 9 months or however. How is the RPCV community doing? And that's a huge general statement, but you are on the inside, you're working with folks who are trying to give back. How is it going? I think
I think it's been hard for a lot of people, and it's definitely reflective of where you were in the country when you lived there. So obviously people that may have been a little bit more in the east or that were closer to the capital. I think it's hard for everybody in general. The beautiful thing about having such a large Peace Corps program that has gone through Ukraine is that there are a lot of us that are able to support each other then in our efforts in country. And the beautiful thing about Peace Corps is that when we are aiding Ukrainians, we're able to send them aid directly versus using organizations. And organizations are great, like refugee organizations are wonderful, but they obviously have overhead because they have staff they have to pay. So it's been a really beautiful thing for us to be able to directly connect with our contacts in Ukraine and to be able to send them aid directly. And I think in that way, I think that's helped some people with like how hard it's been, is just being able to actually send direct aid.
okay.
And then in addition to that, we've also created a crisis group on Facebook for Ukrainian volunteers, where we've been able to, we do regular check-ins to ask people how are things going. We offer assistance if people are looking for different things, transportation for friends or family, or if they're looking for a place for somebody in Europe, and those types of things. And as well as we've hosted some like mental health groups where people have gotten together on Zoom and just kind of talked about how everything's going. And that's been a wonderful thing where people that aren't even on the board or maybe even in the Alliance have just stepped up and offered to run some of these things as current therapists. And so that's been a really wonderful item to have as well.
That's wonderful. Risa, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Please.
Just
Please.
really quickly before we get into the video, and the video will kind of mention these things. Like has been mentioned, there's obviously kind of a wane in the media in regards to everything that's happening in Ukraine. And right now we have some initiatives that we are working on. One of the big things is sponsor circles. So as was mentioned earlier by Kelly, there's the Uniting for Ukraine program. And through the Alliance, we've actually been able to help find people that want to come sponsorships. And I think so far we've been able to help place 18 families. So that's been really wonderful to be partially included in that. And in that way, we have on our website where people can go and fill out if they're interested in finding a sponsor or if they want to be a sponsor. And in addition to that, we've also started working with sponsor circles where essentially a group of individuals could sponsor a family, since it may be hard to be able to provide the money, the location, and transportation and everything else. So sponsor circles are where individuals can come together as a group and sponsor a family or somebody else trying to come over. And then the last thing is we are running a few fundraising campaigns. So our big one is an IFAX campaign that is to send medical supplies over to Ukraine, as well as working with Ed's Friends. And Ed's Friends of Ukraine is an initiative where we are trying to help them buy an ambulance. And then our other thing, because I know some people can't donate or would prefer not to donate towards war efforts, we are also selling cookbooks. We're calling them Babushka's cookbooks, which is grandmother's cookbook, and it's in English. It's Ukrainian recipes as well as recipes for American items that you can make in Ukraine. And we are selling these cookbooks to be able to fund grants that are related to direct aid and humanitarian aid, not necessarily the military aspect. So those are the kind of the three things I wanted to bring up and mention, and then that will also be mentioned in the video. So thank you, Corey.
Oh, Marissa, and I know you had a whole lot to do with the video we're going to see. So again, I hope that it's in sync. We'll find out in about a second. But Marissa, thank you. And thank you to everybody on this call who has worked with the RPCV Community Alliance for Ukraine. You guys have been amazing. And let's take a look at about a 4.5 minute video to see what that looks like.
It is an honor to be here today on behalf of the RPCV Alliance for Ukraine to acknowledge the acts of service of fellow Ruby Award nominees, especially our partners, the Friends of Moldova and Partnering for Peace. More importantly, we are here to continue and strengthen that service at a time of overwhelming need. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin launched a full-scale assault on Ukraine, a country of more than 40 million people and a second home to more than 3,000 returned Peace Corps volunteers. Many of our friends and family members have fled, others are fighting to defend their communities, and some are no longer with us. Everyone who served in Ukraine knows somebody affected by the war. Driven by violent attacks on civilians, 1 in 3 people have fled, 7 million are displaced internally, 5 million are scattered around the globe, and still 13 million are stuck, experiencing food and water shortages but unable to leave because the roads and bridges are destroyed. When the invasion started, Ukraine RPCVs rapidly mobilized to assist our Ukrainian friends, family members, colleagues, and communities. We are raising awareness, sending money and supplies, engaging mass media, and directly assisting with transportation, housing, and money to survive. The Alliance has delivered $280,000 worth of trauma first aid supplies. Our new grant program, funded by sales of our Ukrainian cookbook, is delivering $20,000 to local humanitarian aid projects. And we've started a Uniting for Ukraine sponsorship initiative, connecting Ukrainians with sponsors so that they can find refuge in the United States. Every day, Ukraine RPCVs are connecting on a grassroots level to distribute needed resources and information. However, the initial wave of global attention seems to have crested while we're in this for the long haul. We need partners who are as well. Thanks to the leadership of fellow Ukraine RPCVs, including Rotary Peace Fellows like Shannon Carter, we've connected with Partnering for Peace to work on a global grant for humanitarian aid. And our good friends in Moldova have stepped up to take in refugees, for which we are forever grateful. It is in the worst of times that such collaborations show their value. And we're glad to know that we're not alone. With that, Let me introduce the Friends of Moldova.
Since Russia invaded Ukraine, over 500,000 refugees have crossed the border into neighboring Moldova. Recently, more than 1,000 come each day, with no end to the war in sight. This affront to world peace and stability has struck at the hearts of those affiliated with peace initiatives throughout Rotary and the Peace Corps. The Friends of Moldova, an official member group of the National Peace Corps Association, was founded as a passion project in 2020 by a group of returned Peace Corps volunteers, or RPCVs. Its mission was to support Moldovan civil and youth activists by offering grants to select projects. When the war in Ukraine began, however, the Friends of Moldova jumped into action. Some of us dropped everything to travel to Moldova and coordinate direct assistance to refugees, together with our local partners. Others of us back home in the U.S. have raised funds and spoken out. Together, the entirely volunteer-run Friends of Moldova has raised more than $680,000, one of the largest relief efforts ever undertaken by a Friends of group of returned Peace Corps volunteers. Carol Spahn, the director of the Peace Corps, flew to Moldova to help serve meals at the Friends of Moldova's first Refugee Assistance Center. Moldova's president, Maya Sandu, visited as well. Our distribution centers have now directly provided free food, clothing, and sanitary items to tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees and assisted 175 other Moldovan relief efforts. Today, the Friends of Moldova spend $20,000 a week or more to stock our distribution centers. Money, not time or goodwill, has limited our ability to support the refugee community in Moldova. That's why we've been so excited to team up recently with Rotary International to obtain new funding. Rotary clubs from Oklahoma City to Raleigh, North Carolina have worked with RPCVs and the Friends of Moldova to secure disaster response grants from Rotary. Others will follow. Partnering for Peace, the RPCV Alliance for Ukraine, and the Friends of Moldova exemplify what is best about the Peace Corps and the RPCV community. They embody the generous spirit of Laureate Rupp and would be worthy recipients of the award that honors her.
Okay. Well, we got a taste of what you all have been able to do. Mobilizing, caring, working very hard. And it's extraordinarily impressive what you all have. The Friends of Moldova and certainly the Alliance has been extraordinary. And I think a lot of people on this call, this session today, are going to be interested in participating and coming along beside you. Amy, my good friend Amy McGoldrick, we worked together in North Macedonia in the day, and so Amy, we'd like to. I know there are some exciting projects that people can get involved in. Amy is the acting country director, and she did the evacuation. And she's been holding the fort down since the evacuation. But Amy's here to give us some suggestions on other ways we can get involved in some rather new types of Peace Corps projects. Amy.
It's so happy to see you, Corey. Corey hired me to work at Peace Corps, and it's because of her that I'm here today. So it's so great to reconnect with you, to reconnect with everyone in the audience. I see so many familiar faces. I was seeing Jody Olson's name too, our former director. And I last saw Jody in North Macedonia too, when she came for a visit when she was director. So many other, Michael Pilar, so many other faces in the audience. So it's just great to be here, great to feel all the love and support for Ukraine, those people who've been so active in supporting the country and continue to be active, and those who'd like to get more involved. Peace Corps Ukraine, we have an amazing staff of 54 people. We were able to help support our staff too and give them additional resources so they could relocate once the full-scale invasion happened. But they said, we want to work, we want to do projects. We see that Ukraine is in need. What can we do to support our partners right now? So we thought about what we could do as staff in the absence of volunteers. Unfortunately, we're waiting for a time at which point we could do a security assessment, but we are hopeful we will get Peace Corps volunteers back in the future. So we looked back at what we could do, and we decided to revive our virtual service program. So this is a program which was actually the initiative of my colleague Pilar, who's on the phone here somewhere too, and was started during Michael's time as CD also. And I see also Diana Schmidt and Shelley in the audience too, and they have both been working on virtual service since the beginning. And so this is a way for us to, it's actually becoming quite a model for Peace Corps around the world, for us as a way to operate in Peace Corps countries without having the physical presence of volunteers. So Americans are donating their time to work with local partners in Ukraine. We have about 15 positions already filled, and we have about 10 more on our website. You can work with a local partner by donating 5 to 15 hours a week. We have about 10 more coming down the pipeline too, and it's a wide range of programs. We have opportunities to work with military veterans with conversation classes online. We have opportunities to assist and do teacher training for teachers who are in Western Ukraine and teaching internally displaced people. Just a lot of opportunities to contribute, and I'll drop the website in the chat, but we're really eager now more than ever to support our partners and to find opportunities to connect our PCVs with our counterparts in the field. So, but yeah, thanks. We also are doing a wide range of still teacher training, working on some digital literacy projects, just helping out in whatever way we can right now.
Amy, it's just so impressive that we can keep serving Ukraine and not be there. The virtual Peace Corps project program is going to be quite extraordinary, as we are going to learn from you all how it can be effective. I think there's some wonderful ways we can serve, and we're going to look to you all to find out what really has makes it successful. What are the things? And so, Amy, just a big shout out to you for holding the fort down and getting this going. So valuable to so many Ukrainians that show that we still care. We're still there. We ain't going anywhere, and we're coming back. So anyway, Amy, thank you. Really, thank you so much. All right, gang, we are now going to go into the section where I am asking Shireen, who has been organizing the questions that have come in the chat. And Shireen's going to come on and ask individual panelists the questions that are specific to them. Maybe a couple people will answer a question, but I know she's got some very specific questions that have come in the chat. So Shireen, I'm turning it to you.
Sounds good. Let me just get up our speakers. Give me just one moment. And again, if anyone has any questions, please do type those in the chat so we can go ahead and ask. But in the meantime, I wanted to go ahead and ask Andre, a question came into you about the evacuation efforts. We understand that you helped some of your colleagues and friends evacuate. Could you tell us a little bit about that process?
Thank you. Well, this is a great question. When deciding to whether or not to evacuate or not, people go through a lot of motions, and I'm very happy to hear that in the earlier part of this meeting, we were discussing the fact that Ukrainians do not necessarily want to be outside of Ukraine, to leave and permanently resettle in other countries like the US or Europe. But during the war, of course, this urge to evacuate becomes very important. However, there is still a lot of hesitation. And when I was talking to my friends, my first thought was, let's get you to safety and then we'll figure out what's next. And this is especially true for people with children, but even for those who don't have children, but who are close to the territories that has been bombed, which as of February and March 2014, and even now, there is no safe place in Ukraine that is not has not been bombed at all. So, but people struggle with leaving families behind, or elders in their family, There is property considerations. So all of this becomes, all of these factors become very individual factors based on human values. What do I value as a person more? My own safety, or my house, or, you know, I don't want to leave my elderly parent at home. Then there is hard travel conditions. Back then, in March, with the Russian troops being just outside of Kiev, there were consistent shelling and bombing of the highways, shooting the civilian vehicles, and so on and so forth. And then the next factor is uncertainty as to what is waiting ahead. Where do I live if I travel to Europe? How do I get food? Who meets me? Like, just all of these logistical challenges become overwhelming in the time when you don't even know where your passport is, or you have no idea which road to take. So all of these factors are very important. And I just want to stress that it wasn't just Peace Corps friends and colleagues specifically. I was reaching out to anyone that I know, any friends. And so my message to folks like that was just get on the evacuation train. And luckily, Ukrainian railways started offering evacuation trains under very difficult conditions, but they were consistently running very early on and throughout all the period, all the months when evacuation was necessary. So my message was get on the train and I'll do the rest. And so just my connections with friends in Poland, Hungary, and Romania, if the person agrees to take a train or to drive somewhere to the border crossing point, then my job was just to get in touch with the friends and make sure that the person is met. They have some housing for at least for the initial days, and then they can put the paperwork in. So just a couple of examples. There was a heartbreaking story of a family with two children. One of them is a teenager who is a brain cancer survivor, and the younger daughter is on the autistic spectrum somewhere. They had immigrated to Kiev from Luhansk Oblast, which was captured by the Russians in 2014, and then they ended up being shelled in Kiev just 8 years after they were able to resettle and start their lives all over. So I helped them get to the border with Poland in their vehicle, and then made sure that they're met there, and they are now living in the western Poland in a small town, but they have a job and everything else. A friend and a single mother who is now in Bucharest, a colleague from Peace Corps who is now in the US. But the stories are very similar. It's like, just get somewhere, then we'll see what while you're crossing Ukraine territory, we'll make sure that somebody meets you. So that was the certainty that helped people take the decision, or not.
Thank you, Andrei, for sharing that. Do any of the other speakers have anything that they wanted to share or add about evacuation? Otherwise, I can go with a question that has come from the audience. We have someone asking from the audience about the ways, disabled people evacuating and the challenges that they face. They had sort of asked about, are there ways that we can help sort of misplaced and disabled people who are trying to leave or who have left already? Or anyone with special needs. I don't know, Kelly, if you know about programs to help people with that. Not sure if Kelly's still with us.
I am. It's a great question. And I'm sorry that I don't know about specific programs to help people with disabilities. I mean, I've seen some incredible videos over the last couple of months of people helping elderly and disabled people. I mean, it's something I can certainly reach out to UNHCR, but I have a feeling this is This is something probably done via, local NGOs or local governments. So I'm afraid from the U.S. government side, I don't have anything terribly relevant to share.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Andre?
Yes, this is very much based on the locality where the individual is. So if it's, for example, the Kharkiv Oblast, there is an organization I just added, today. I think it should be on the list. It's called the Home of the Human, and that organization has been very active from the onset of the war to assist specifically people who have been left behind by their families, who are disabled, who are in beds or in the wheelchairs, and who are not able to even take care of their own basic needs. There are organizations like that or volunteer groups like that in other cities, but there is no centralized program where you can just call a hotline and figure that out. It's case-by-case situation, and in this case, it's exactly like if you know someone in that community that needs help, the best way to do is to contact someone who is from that community. And so through the large volunteer network, I'm sure you can find some people like that.
Thank you, Andre. It's very helpful. We've received another question about the fact that we are seeing a rise in Ukrainian patriotism and the rapid movement to switch from the Russian language to the Ukrainian language. Could we have any of the speakers talk a little bit about what they think about those changes and perhaps what role, if any, did the language differences play in the Russian invasion? So again, any of the speakers, if you were interested in answering that question.
I can just say about 30 seconds. Andre is better placed, of course, to answer that. I would just say that situația movi, the language situation, was in the 4 years that I was there intense. And there were different laws that were passed by the Ukrainian government related to which language, whether, what could be broadcast in Ukrainian or Russian or with subtitles, etc. The real issue we thought was the Russian Orthodox patriarchy versus Ukrainian Orthodoxy, and there's language and culture mixed up with that. But we are seeing quite a few areas now refusing to speak Russian, and there's many people I know who are now stopping speaking Russian, and that's all anecdotal, but Andre will have much more and more in depth to say.
Great, Andre, please.
Thank you. The question of the language has always been contentious in Ukraine, sorry. And the Russians have been using it a lot, I think. There are 4 features that define nation: the population, the territory, the government, and sovereignty. Language is not necessarily a feature that defines a nation. And I just want to, make it very clear that unfortunately, very often we choose to fight each other. And I mean, we Ukrainians, based on certain features that distinguish us, rather than those that then embrace those that unite us. I think the discourse around language is quite similar to the discourse around LGBT issues in Ukraine. Because again, sometimes I feel like these are the issues that are very distinct, and people just choose to jump on them as the bulls and attack, rather than think about it and embrace the fact that we are different. So eventually, the issue of being Ukrainian is not the issue of language. It's the issue of identifying yourself as a Ukrainian and as a Russian, primarily, like someone who speaks Russian as his native language, but I didn't learn Ukrainian really until I was 10 or 11. That is unacceptable. Ukrainian should be taught in all schools. And in order for me to decide which language I should be using in my life, I should know Ukrainian first and foremost, because we are Ukrainians. And then, if I want to decide whether to speak Ukrainian, Russian, or Romanian, or Polish in Ukraine, that is my choice, but only if I respect Ukrainian language. So that is very subtle distinction. And as a Ukrainian, I don't want to let Mr. Putin write my narrative and say that he is coming to protect Russian speakers because Russian speakers love the Russian world. No, that's wrong. And by the same way, I'm not going to let anyone in Ukraine, another Ukrainian, to write my narrative for me and to tell me that I belong to the category of Russified Ukrainians. That is the new term that has been coined by some kind of, more right-wing kind of parties. So I would say I have very middle ground, but in order to decide which language to use, you should definitely speak Ukrainian and write Ukrainian flawlessly. And so it has to be taught in schools and elsewhere.
Thank you so much. That's really important. I also got one question from the audience, and again, for anyone, any of the speakers, what are some of the historical lessons that can be learned from this war? Michael, I see that you're like thinking.
My wife just came home. I was telling her that I was on the panel. I could just give an uneducated, quick opinion on that. I think the lesson is that Russia can't be trusted as an international partner. They disregard international human rights treaties, and anyone who thinks otherwise is fooling themselves to their detriment and to the world detriment. I mean, that's become very clear. It should have been clear after 2014, and it wasn't. So that's my take on that.
Thank you. Sanjay?
Yeah, just I don't want to be the only one responding to questions, so feel free to add anything. And thanks, Michael, for this. I absolutely agree. There is a lot of lessons, and unfortunately, history teaches us lessons that no one learns. I think it was Stephen Erickson who wrote that. But there is a bunch of lessons for the world, which one of them is, I would put it more broadly, not just Russia cannot be trusted, which is definitely the case, but an authoritarian regime, any authoritarian regime cannot be trusted. And there is a lot of parallels with the pre-World War II situation in Europe, and these parallels were heard even before the start of full-scale invasion in Ukraine, like the Munich Agreement, the Bohemia and Moravia annexation of Germany, the division of Poland between the Soviet Union and Germany. But actually, the main question is, pacification didn't work back then, but pacification did not work now. And it did not prevent, so European attempts to look the other way and not notice the start of new Russian aggression did not help anyone, even in this war. There is another kind of lesson that democracy is fragile, and unfortunately, Russians have learned how to play the democratic playbook in other countries and subvert democratic regimes. There is a lot of lessons for Ukraine specifically that I want to mention. And one of those is, unfortunately, Ukraine still had to deal with a lot of corruption issues. And all the presidents, including current president, have been tainted with the corruption. So if you look at, Panama Papers, you see a lot of the previous presidents' name written on the wall. If you look at Pandora Papers that were released, you see a lot of current presidents. Zelensky is, being mingled with corruption cases and corruption money. And unfortunately, until last month, Ukraine did not have the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau, which had been instated to fight corruption based on the demands of the European Union accession. So all of that is a lesson for Ukraine, and we do need to learn these lessons and move forward, because it would have helped us to prepare much better. And then, like I said, the final lesson is think about what unites you, not what divides you, and kind of embrace the fact that Ukraine is heterogeneous, as opposed to trying to find our ways and fight with each other. We have bigger fish to fry.
Well, thank you so much, Andrzej, and thank you so much to all of our panelists. I'm going to turn it over now to Corey, who's going to wrap up the session.
All right. Yeah, and I just Andre and Kelly and Michael and Reza and Amy, thank you all so much for giving us just a great hour and a half, full of information, full of inspiration. And what we want to do right now is we're going to put up a slide that has a lot of organizations that you all out there can get involved in. We want you just to take a look at this. This will be posted on our website. We're not saying you can write all this down, but we wanted to just give you a snapshot. This was created by our panelists, our speakers, and the one that we don't have on here, but we will get on here, is how to get involved in virtual teaching through the Peace Corps working for Ukraine. Okay, so these are some of the places. And we hope that tonight's event has moved some of you to want to help the Ukrainians that right now certainly could use it. So thank you everybody for being here. We will officially close now, but if people want to stay on and wave and say hi to, gee, I haven't seen you in years, we'll leave it open so that folks can connect. But again, panelists, thank you very much. Look forward to learning more and watching how this all evolves. With people like you behind it, it's going to get, I hope, better. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava.
Heroyam Slava.
Heroyam Slava.
Heroyam Slava.
It is an honor to be here today.
Doreen, put us back into gallery.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Thank you all very much. Andre, Shireen, thank you. Courtney, nice to see you.
Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you.
Darlene, it's so great to see you.